Hey there, this is Greg Musgrave with Caveat. We are a five-piece progressive metal band out of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And we're one of the longest running bands in Alberta doing this genre of music, being metal. And we got a new record coming out on February the 11th called Alchemy. So you can get that on all your streaming platforms, or you can purchase it from us directly at caveatcalgary.bandcamp.com. And I've got a couple of questions here about the new record that I'm going to answer now. So we will start with what is the meaning behind the band name. No super cool story there. Basically, it was a case of when the band started. We spitballed ideas for what the band should be called, and then the bass player had asked some friends of his what they thought. We kind of spitballed it around for a couple of weeks before we decided on anything. And Terry Baldwin, the bass player at the time, came in and said someone had suggested the name Caveat, and it all of us just kind of agreed and said, yeah, that's cool. And we went with that, and there was no real big thought into it. It kind of comes from Caveat emptor, so buyer beware. So beware. So beware what you're looking for when you listen to Caveat, because you never know what you're going to get. So, can I tell you a little bit about Alchemy? So Alchemy is obviously our latest record, and to tell you about it, it's one where our lead guitar player Joe Sikorsky kind of handled a lot of the music writing on this one, where in the past it's our last record was basically divided up. So Casey Rogers, our drummer, wrote 4 songs, I wrote 4 songs, and Joe wrote 4 songs, and then I wrote all the lyrics over top of that. But it was for kind of distinctive styles, where this one is a little bit more heavy on Joe's style. And not that Joe has one particular style; he's got a ton of different stuff that he's able to write, which is great. But this sound ended up being a little bit more kind of melodic. It's still kind of technical, but not as fast and notey, I think is a good way to put it. We try to really, really focus on more elaborate melodies this time, being that Amanda was taking over more of a much heavier presence in the vocal department. So it was a case where in the past I've always been, the main vocalist since day one. I've always wrote the lyrics. I've always wrote the kind of vocal melodies and whatnot. So on our last record, Consummation, Amanda came in when the record was done, and she was brought in because Casey is her boyfriend, and they live together. We were recording the album basically in their apartment. She came in to do some vocals, and I was blown away. Casey was blown away. Joe, man, all of us were really taken back by her voice and her contributions to that album, to the point where it was intended as a backing vocal thing for her to come in and do that, and we ended up using her on actual courses where it was just her. So on this time around, and by the end of that recording session, it was a case where we literally asked her to join the band. So it was an interesting kind of flux period for the band, where we were changing, and that's what bands do that have been around as long as we have. We've been around, like I said, for 20 years. So it's an opportunity for us to explore new territory, and that's what we've done on this record. We've got Amanda a lot more out front, which was really kind of liberating for me in the vocal department, because I've always been kind of tied to the guitar and writing vocals that were conducive to me singing and playing, and sometimes that is constricting as to what I'm able to do. And plus, my voice is my voice. So her voice is incredibly powerful, and it's a totally different dynamic than what we've done in the past. I'm still singing on the album, but way more melodically driven in the vocal department this time. So that really turned out cool, and like I said, it's just a bit more I don't want to say ambient, but it's got a very atmospheric feel to it, and I think people are going to dig it. So can I talk about the lyrics of the release? Well, lyrics are always kind of a personal thing for me. I don't like to get too much into it. But essentially, the lyrics are kind of purging some dark stuff within what was going on in my life at the time. Without getting into too much specifics, that's kind of what it was based on, and those things were purged accordingly. And yeah, you can kind of listen to the lyrics or read the lyrics and kind of come up with your own trip as to what it means to you. But basically it's just about being in a bad place and overcoming that stuff and coming out the other side. So can I tell you about the album cover art? So the album cover art was done by a guy named Mickey from Mithrid Art, and he's a guy that I think Joe had originally found online when we were looking for artwork for the Exit Strategy album, The Atrocity Machine, which is another band that Joe, Casey, and I were in for 11 years, a death grind band. And we found his artwork, and we also used him on a project called Phantom Limbs record Mantra, which is another project that Joe and I were in, a kind of progressive metal band. And so we've used him on a few occasions now. So this is, we actually used him and commissioned a full art, or for a full piece for the last Exit Strategy album. That never happened. We got the artwork and it was completed and it was fantastic, but we never got to use it because the band unfortunately dissolved before that record was finished. And so this is actually the fourth time that we've worked with him, and he's always just been great to work with. He's been professional beyond compare, and his work is fantastic. So it's kind of like when you find musicians that you work with well, if you find a good group of people, you keep working with them. So this is a case that we've been working with him for better part of 10 years, and it's working well. So we're going to continue with that. So do I think it's important, or do we think it's important to have a label deal? I don't know if it's important as it is. It's obviously beneficial, and it's an asset to a band to have a label deal. But I see a lot of bands kind of doing great things without it. But yeah, I think if you want to get to a certain point, the goal is to get a decent record deal, or any kind of record deal that's going to give you some more exposure to get your music to more ears. But there's also other things that you can do now. You know, there's publishing companies, there's, you know, all sorts of PR companies that are out there that then can assist bands to get your music into the appropriate places without necessarily having a label do all that kind of stuff for you, as far as getting interviews and media spots and things like that. There are outlets for bands to do that. So I certainly think if bands are tenacious enough and, you know, look into it enough, there are ways to get your music out there. So that's what we're trying to do, and yeah, hopefully it works. So what and when got you into music? That's going back to childhood, you know. As far as being in a metal band, the first records that I can think that got me into heavy music were Quiet Riot's Mental Health, Pyromania from Def Leppard, Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil. I remember going to the library and going through records, and that Motley Crue album was just a black album with a pentagram, and it was just like, what the fuck is this? And opened it up, and, you know, they're all in their crazy gear with fire and flames all around them. So yeah, I asked my mom to rent that record for me, and yeah, she did. And I just kind of sat there in front of the record player for a couple of weeks or whatever it was, and tripped out on this crazy heavy music I never heard before. And that evolved into other things like Iron Maiden. Power Slave was absolutely pinnacle in my early years. That was a huge album. Stay Hungry from Twisted Sister. And then it evolved into all the kind of modern stuff, you know, your Opeth, Machine Head, Pantera, you know, all that kind of stuff, the early thrash years, like the Megadeth, you know, Metallica, obviously, all that kind of stuff. And then these days, yeah, I'm into a lot more, I guess, kind of diverse, eclectic stuff. But yeah, if I could change anything about the music industry, what would it be? I would just think that to try to make it more lucrative some way, you know, like I see these bands that I look up to that I think make phenomenal music, that are musical geniuses, like Daniel Gildenlau from Pain of Salvation, for instance, I think is a musical genius. I think he's just one of the most amazing songwriters I've ever heard. And from what I know about the guy, as much of an entrepreneur that he is, he runs his website and he does a lot of the stuff very hands-on. He's making the basic stuff to get by, and that's great. He's able to do what he wants to do, but I'd like to see bands like that are creating truly different, special music that's not status quo, that's not bubblegum pre-manufactured bullshit that goes on the radio. Like really genuinely talented, amazing musicians be able to get more for their art, and that's ultimately what it comes down to. And what the solution is for that, I could only speculate, but the fact that you've got your conglomerate sites like your Spotify's and Apple Music, everyone's doing streaming now, but the fact is that the bands are getting jack shit back from that. You have to be doing merch sales, you have to be doing so much more diversification in your marketing that it's tough, man. So, have we ever had any epic fails during a live performance? Probably the biggest one that comes to mind would be we played an outdoor festival in Benalto, Alberta, called Alberta's Own, and it's basically in a rodeo grounds, and they put these big flatbed trailers. And one band goes, as soon as the one band's done, the next band starts, because they're side by side. Anyway, that's irrelevant, but we were playing that festival and we decided to play our big fucking epic off of our album Red, called Vindication, which is like it's like 9 or 10 minutes or something like that. It's incredibly long and complex. It's by far one of the most elaborate, complex things that we've done. And we just fell off the rails live, and to the point where we had to stop the song. It was just like we couldn't come back from it. When that happens sometimes live, you're kind of on the roller coaster and you're going off a little bit, but then you hopefully get it back on the rails. This was not happening. We flew off the fucking rails and went down the canyon, fucking burst into flames, and had to start over. I had to start that tune over. So yeah, that's probably the biggest one, I would think. Any new music and movies that have impressed me? Music-wise, the new 12-Foot Ninja Vengeance album is phenomenal. Luna's Call, which is a not independent band, they're on Listenable Records, but they're more of an indie style band out of the UK. They released an album called Void at the end of 2020, and then they got their label deal or distro deal or whatever it was beginning of last year. But that album Void is really, 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 really good. And I actually saw Charlie Griffiths from Haken post something about that on social media, just saying that he had listened to this record and he was really impressed by it. So I checked it out because I'm big Haken fan. And yeah, it was kind of like the album of last year. And I typically don't listen to a lot of death metal anymore. I never listened to a lot of it. So it has to be pretty interesting, like something like an Opeth or even Bloodbath or something like that. But yeah, it's a phenomenal record. Volaz, this that they did last year. Witness is great. Diablo Swing Orchestra's Swagger and Stroll Down the Rabbit Hole. That's a phenomenal record as well. Just, really, really kind of crazy stuff. A lot of swing mixed with metal, horns, weird shit and horns. I love weird shit and horns, like Mr. Bungle, Dog Fashion Disco, Diablo Swing Orchestra. That stuff is some of my favorite music in the whole world. So, yeah, that's kind of what I've been jamming on. So, as far as movies go, I watched Werewolf Within, because I'm a big horror movie buff, and it was all right. Can't say it was the best thing I've ever seen, but that's just the last thing I've seen. I've got 2 young kids, so I don't watch movies very much anymore. So, but there's some music for you. Anyway, check it out. Can you tell us a little bit about your local music scene? Well, I'd love to if we were in the middle of a pandemic, but right now, as I do this interview, we're at this crazy new peak with this variant, this Omicron. So there's nothing happening. Basically, we've got our album release booked for February 11th at Dickens, and it's up in the air if it's even going to happen. So that's one thing about this album, just to kind of digress it for a second, but this album has been written, our new record has been written for 3 years. Like, it's been a long time, and it took forever to come to fruition because of this COVID shit. So it's very disheartening to kind of get to this point and be ready to present it finally, and then it looked like, you know, we're not going to be able to do that live performance, and I hope it happens. So as it stands now, let's say February 11th, Caveat is playing at Dickens with Skepsis and Siren. So check it out. If we're not playing that day, then we'll be doing something online to promote it. So check us out on social media. We'll be doing something. But yeah, the local metal scene right now is it's up in the air. You know, everyone's dealing with uncertainty. We're dealing with personal, social, mental issues, but in general, it's, you know, up until a couple of years ago, it was very, very healthy and vibing, and yeah. So unfortunately, at this particular moment, it's a hard question to answer, but I would say all the bands are itching to kind of get back to normal. Those who are still together after this time, because it's hard to get together to even jam with your band when you're told to stay away from everybody all the time. It's hard, yeah. Anyway, everyone knows it's hard. I don't need to tell you that, but that's basically where we're at. So what are the future plans of Caveat? I'd say to finally get this record out and get it into as many ear holes as possible, and then figure out what the next stage is going to be. And as far as what I was just talking about with COVID, I'm sure that's going to highly influence what happens. But what happens next is to be determined. So I hope more comes to fruition, and more music comes. There's definitely music being written, and that is the plan. And I have to be optimistic and say we're going to get through this, and that it'll all smooth out, and we'll be back to normal. And when that happens, hopefully Caveat's still grinding this out. So in any case, thank you very much for the opportunity to do this interview. Really do appreciate it. Again, it is caveatcalgary.bandcamp.com to check out our merchandise. All of our back catalog is on there. You can purchase our stuff. You can stream it. You can do what you want. You can get some shirts. And then, yeah, February 11th at Dickens, that's when we're planning to release Alchemy to the world. We got our Infinite video out at the moment right now, which is our first single. We got our next single coming out, which is the title track, Alchemy. And we got a super cool video that's going to be released with that. It's being edited together right now, but we did a really incredible video shoot for that, so we're super pumped to see how that turns out. It's not going to be your typical kind of performance video. The Infinite video was very much that. It was a performance driven video. This one, a lot more storyline and some interesting stuff for sure. So I'll kind of leave it at that for now, and that should be coming out shortly before the release of the record or around that time. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. Otherwise, Greg Musgrave, Caveat, out. See ya.